Good evening, and thanks for coming out this evening. I'm City Manager Jeff Barton, and to my left is Budget and Research Director Amber Williamson. We are here this evening to talk to you about a potential sales tax increase that our council is considering to balance our 25-26 budget. And so this evening, what we would like to do is to walk you through some of the things that we're looking at and some of the decision points that we as a city have to make. However, before we do that, I do want to introduce our interpreters who will help us with this evening for any of those that need language translation. I'd like to introduce and bring to the stadium Mario Barajas, and we also have in the back Elsie Duarte. So, Mario?
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mario Barajas, and as Jeff said, Elsie Duarte is also going to be helping out with the Spanish interpretation for whoever needs the interpretation in Spanish. I'm going to introduce ourselves to our Spanish-speaking audience now. Muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Mario Barajas. Voy a estar trabajando junto con Elsie Duarte como intérpretes a los de habla hispana. Quisiera repasar un par de pautas con ustedes para que podamos quizás sugerirles para que podamos interpretarles de la mejor manera. Primeramente, si es que van a dar un comentario público, les pedimos de que hablen de una manera lenta y clara, así de esa manera podemos entenderles e interpretarles cabalmente. Enseguida también les pedimos de que hablen sin distracciones de fondo, así podemos de igual manera interpretarles. Les pedimos que sigan esas pautas. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mario. So tonight, again, what we want to do is just give you a couple of key points as to how we got to this place, as well as just provide for you some background information on some very key decision points that the council has to wrestle with as they balance the 25-26 budget. One thing I want to say is, unlike the federal government, we are required by statute to balance our budget. 25-26 budget has to be balanced. Unlike the federal government, as we all know, the federal government can deficit spend. They can adopt a budget that has a deficit. We don't do that. Our budget must be balanced. So on January 15th, the City Council allowed staff to post a notice of their consideration of a potential sales tax increase equal to 0.5%. And the reason that we're doing that today, if you rewind to this time last year, Amber and I presented a multi-year forecast that showed for fiscal year 25-26 that we have the potential of a deficit of roughly $92 million. That $92 million was largely driven by several factors, one of which Amber will she'll talk about all of them in detail, but just to kind of a little high-level information. A few years, last year, the state took action to eliminate the cities and towns' ability to collect residential rental tax. And so when you look at that, Amber will share some information with you that has a very detrimental impact on the city's revenue stream. And over the next couple of years, through our forecast horizon, roughly through 27-28 fiscal year, we're going to lose about $300 million as a result of just that action alone. On top of that, a few years back, when Governor Doug Ducey was the governor, there was a decision to bring the state to a flat tax from an income tax perspective. That is also going to cost us a significant amount of money, and Amber will disclose all of those slides for you and walk you through that. So a lot of what we're dealing with today is a combination of those actions that were taken by the state, but on top of that, we also have some other things that we're also trying to address, just like normal inflation that the cities have to deal with, just like many of us at home. We're dealing with the rising increase of cost of services and goods. The city has that same thing. The other thing I would like to point out to you is that we are also dealing with, over the last couple of years, especially using our ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, we've been very responsive to the needs of our unsheltered population. And so we received $396 million from the federal government under ARPA. With our strategic plan that the council adopted to address all of those things that were affected by COVID, we allocated $158 million, or roughly 40% of our ARPA dollars, to our homeless activities. That means everything from mental and behavioral health to setting up shelters to providing food and meals and those types of things. And so we also know that those funds are now coming to an end. Those funds are expiring, and we do not want those services to stop. So one of the things that we're working on now is how do we transition those programs and services into our general fund budget. We know next year that we have some funding, but that funding is also going to expire. And we can cover everything with grant funds up to the point of about $9 million that we're short. However, looking forward past fiscal year 25-26, the cost to continue our homeless operations services are costing about $25 to $27 million a year. That needs to be added back into budget, so that actually exacerbates the fund balance situation that we're dealing with. On top of that, you see many of our folks in white shirts out in the audience. Those are our firefighters. We also know that as we stand as a growing city, our fire response times are not necessarily where they would like them to be. They're not in line where we'd like them to be from a national standard perspective, and Amber will speak a little bit to that. But we need additional firefighters, especially if you look at what's happened in California over the last couple of months. Response times are critical, and our firefighters will tell you that every second counts. So those are just a few things that we're dealing with over the next couple of years, and that we'll bring into the council presentation on February 25th. But with that, I'll transition to Amber, and she'll walk you through a very detailed slide deck that will walk you through some of the key data that we're looking at as we make this very tough decision.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to start off by just giving a general overview of our city budget. For the current fiscal year for 24-25, the City of Phoenix operating budget is just over $7 billion. Our budget is made up of three main funds. It's our general fund, which is our unrestricted fund providing for our basic city services like police and fire, parks and libraries, and human services. Our next fund is our special revenue fund. These funds are mostly made up of our voter-approved funds for things like public safety, parks and preserves, transportation, also includes grants and Arizona highway user revenues. Enterprise funds, that is our next category at 32% of our budget. That is made up of our departments and funds that operate more like a business. So they generate revenue from services they provide directly to individuals who pay for that service. So you can think of the airport, aviation, for example, water, wastewater, and solid waste. So focusing on our general fund, I wanted to provide a high-level explanation about our revenues. Current fiscal year, 40% of our revenues are derived from local sales or transaction privilege tax and use taxes. 38% of our revenue, excuse me, is made up of our state shared revenues. This includes our state shared sales tax, income tax, and vehicle license taxes. The council cannot effectuate our state shared revenue. That is prescribed by state statute. Primary property tax makes up about 12% of our general fund revenue. This also has some limitations on it set by state and city charter, so there's really no opportunity there to increase primary property taxes by the council. User fees and other makes up about 10% of our revenue, and the primary category here is ambulance billing generated by our fire department with rates set by the state. So in terms of the general fund budget, what do we spend our money on in the general fund? Primarily public safety. So 61% of our operating budget is dedicated to police, fire, and emergency management. 12% is made up of community enrichment. This includes parks, libraries, and human services. General government's 11%. That's our administrative type functions, including information technology, human resources, finance, budget research, city manager's office, and our mayor and council. And then 9% is for criminal justice, community development, environmental services, and transportation. And then 7% is for our contingency or our rainy day fund. So what this slide shows is demonstrating how significant the growth has been in the city of Phoenix. And if you're a native or have been here for a long time, you're aware of that. Our city is now the 5th largest in the country, largest in the state. We've seen a significant increase in population over the last 40+ years. We also have more area or square miles that we have to provide services to. The city's just grown exponentially. We have more streets that we have to maintain and to build. We have more parks and libraries that we have to operate. We also have more calls for service for public safety for both police and fire. We know we have a bigger fleet. We have units that we need to maintain properly, more building inspections that we have to do. But what's really interesting, if you look at the growth in our city employees on a per capita basis or per 1,000, we're actually lower today at 9.5 compared to what we were in 1980. So I think that's pretty impressive. I think it shows the city council and the prior councils kind of their focus on trying to limit the size or the growth of government, at the same time meeting expectations from our residents for higher service. As Jeff mentioned, unfortunately, the state has taken actions to limit our local control and to diminish our tax base. They've done this through Senate Bill 1131 that permanently eliminates residential rental tax that the city has relied on for decades to generate resources to support our budget. That becomes effective January of 25. Senate Bill 1828, that does reduce the individual income tax rate down to the current flat tax of 2.5%, and I'll demonstrate momentarily how that's going to affect our revenue. So first, residential rental. What this table shows is the estimated loss of residential rental starting in the current fiscal year by our fund type. So our first fund, the general fund, experienced a loss of $18.5 million estimated in the current fiscal year, all funds $35.4 million. Next year will be the first annual full impact from that residential rental loss, about $44.6 million to the general fund, $85.5 million to all funds. But as we move forward over what I refer to as our multi-forecast horizon, it's a loss of over $300 million in revenue from that one legislative action. For state-shared income tax revenues, again, primarily due to the flat tax, we're going to experience less revenue. Starting in the current fiscal year, 24-25, you see our revenue goes from $436 million to $351 million. That's a year-over-year change of 19%, expecting more losses next fiscal year until this revenue stream is estimated to start increasing. It's less revenue than we would have had otherwise had the state taken that action. Some other budget challenges and unfunded needs that our city council is going to have to take into account as they adopt a balanced budget for next year. Inflation. So just as all of you and most consumers have experienced increases in inflation, so has the city. We're a significant sized organization. We have a lot of procurement needs, and everything we go to buy pretty much has gone up in cost significantly over the last few years. That places a lot of pressure on our budget. For our Phoenix Fire Department, emergency response times is critical. It's not only critical to respond to the community when there's an emergency, it's critical that our firefighters have the support and the resources they need in order to do their job. We need to get those response times down. More resources are going to be necessary to do that. Homelessness. Our Office of Homeless Solutions has done an amazing job trying to increase capacity to help those unsheltered individuals struggling with homelessness. We are relying on our American Rescue Plan Act dollars. Council used that very strategically. However, it was one time. It's expiring. We've got to move those costs, as Jeff indicated, into our general fund. I do want to mention that the city has added 1,400 shelter beds, 37% increase in capacity. So we want to make sure we can continue that good work. Voters approved the 2023 General Obligation Bond Program. This was sorely needed. It was a great decision and an investment for our community over the next 5 years, bringing fire stations, parks, libraries, community centers, splash pads, street maintenance, all types of different projects, but with a GO bond program comes increased operating costs. So when those facilities are online and ready to open to the public, we have to staff them and pay for ongoing operating costs. We're going to build those into our multi-year forecast that I'll present on the 25th, but that will add further pressure to the budget. And unfortunately, our general fund revenues are slowing. We base our estimates off the most recent data, and unfortunately, year to date, revenue collections are starting to significantly slow, and we're going to have to lower our estimated revenue, causing further pressure on our budget. And last but certainly not least, residents want more services. So we often hear from community members when we do our budget hearings and when they deal with our city council offices, they don't want less service, they want more service. And they want good service. They don't want inferior service. So to provide that, we've got to have adequate resources to deliver. So I want to take a minute to walk through our transaction privilege tax rate history. I think this is really important to demonstrate that since 1986, the rate for our general fund has been 1.2%. It has not changed since that time. We've increased the TPT rate over this period of time, most recently in January of 2016, up to the current 2.3%. But those increases were voter approved and they were for dedicated and restricted purposes like transportation, public safety, and parks and preserves. I also wanted to provide how do we compare to our surrounding cities in terms of our TPT, our tax rate. As you can see, the city of Phoenix at 2.3% for our largest category, which is retail sales tax. We are lower than 6 other cities. If the council were to elect to increase the full 0.5% up to the 2.8, we would be on par with City of Surprise and lower than Glendale and Buckeye. Next, I want to walk through how would an increase in the TPT rate of up to 2.8 impact a resident or a consumer when they're purchasing something that is taxable. So for example, something that's valued at $100 today at the current rate, you would pay $102.30. If that rate increases to 2.8, you would pay $102.80 for an increase of 50 cents. As we move to a purchase valued at $1,000 or $10,000, those increases would be $5 and $50 respectively. So to provide some just basic examples of a transaction that's taxable and what the impact of the rate increase could be, if you were to buy a cup of black coffee for $2.10, at the rate of 2.8%, you would pay 1 more penny for that cup of coffee. To go out to the movies, 2 adults, 2 children, you'd pay an increase of 19 cents to go to the movies. For a family dinner for 4, you'd pay an increase of 40 cents. To buy a washer and a dryer valued at almost $1,100, you pay $5.48. And then to buy a used vehicle valued at roughly $13,000, you'd pay an additional $64.98. So in terms of next steps, where are we going from here? So next, we'll present the multi-year forecast and general fund status for next fiscal year to the council on February 25th. We'll post our public notice of intent for a TPT increase on February 27th. And then on March 18th, Jeff and I will present the proposed 25-26 trial budget. And that is when the council will hold their required public hearing, and they may take action to increase the TPT rate at that time. And that concludes our presentation, and we can move to speakers.
So we do have, I believe, 5 speaker cards. So when I call your name, do you want them on the microphone? Is that easier? So I'm going to ask if we can move the microphone down then, because I don't want people to have to traverse the stairs for ADA. Yes, if we can move it down, I would appreciate that. So our first speaker needs no introduction, Mr. Rick Neymark.
Thank you for not making me walk upstairs at my age. So it's kind of funny. I started employment and moved to Phoenix on July 1 of 1986. And I was like 24 years old, and I just had my 63rd birthday. So that is a long span without increasing taxes. And the city's done a great job over the years managing the budget in a way that you haven't had to do that. The way I view this, and I appreciate your leadership, Jeff and Amber, in bringing it forward this way. The way I view this is the state government decided to restructure the way we fund our government. And unfortunately, that restructure requires Phoenicians to raise taxes on themselves, and it has to be sales taxes because you can't raise income taxes. So I think it is absolutely warranted and necessary that you take that action, you recommend that action, and I endorse it. I apologize for how I look tonight. I'm right in the middle of my painting class across the park, and but it's a good testament to the fact that things like arts and culture programs would just completely go away if you didn't raise this tax. I sit in a group called the Friends of Phoenix Arts and Culture, and we are absolutely petrified of you going forward with a budget without increasing the sales tax. In addition, I spent a lot of time in our parks, particularly Hance Park. Our parks, as you pointed out, the rental tax cut will impact that park's special tax that was passed many years ago that I had an opportunity to work on. Likewise, transportation. We can't let those decisions by the voters deteriorate because of what the state did. And so we need to replace it. 2 other things. I sat on the bond committee. You know, the voters voted to build all these facilities, renovate facilities. Oh, you can't operate them if you don't have this revenue. And then I just got to say the increase in people who don't have shelter, don't have housing, has really increased the burden on police, fire. Rachel's group's doing a great job, but we're not going to be able to cut those services. And I'm also totally shocked at what I read in your statistics about the increase in calls for service for fire in particular and the response time. So we do have to watch out for that. So thank you. I support the tax increase wholeheartedly because we have to do it.
Thank you, Rick. Next up, Patrick McDaniel. Patrick?
Good evening. My name is Patrick McDaniel. I'm here today speaking in my capacity as Advocacy Director for Phoenix Community Alliance. We're a downtown business advocacy organization, economic growth organization that has been just recently celebrated our 40th year. I'm here today to express our support for these increases. Simply put, the city services to which people have become accustomed to that the city services that people expect would not exist without these taxes. While this is a citywide issue, I'd like to take a minute to examine this maybe from the lens of downtown Phoenix, where we really focus our time and energies. As Rick just mentioned earlier, the work that's done by Rachel Milne and her staff, the Office of Homeless Solutions, is what they've accomplished in 2-3 short years is nothing short of miraculous. The GEO bond that was recently passed by voters. Without these funds, these programs will not continue. These buildings will not be renovated. These are the things that make downtown. These are the things that make city livable, that make it attract more people. While these increases may be small, their impact is exponential. These are the services that, as a city, we need. These are the services that, as a downtown, will account for increased growth and further growth. So once again, I'd just like to express the support of Phoenix Community Alliance and our over 350 members, our board of directors, for the increase. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Next up, Mark Schaefer. Mark?
Hello. I'm a homeless advocate for funding for empowerment, and going back to the general fund, and like you mentioned before with the shelters, they've increased, but there still has to be more, especially in the summer, 100 degrees at midnight, and this past winter, they just opened up a parking lot, for tents at 15th and Jefferson, I think. Mm-hmm. So that helped in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. But in the summer, they need another, more beds or, something like that. Right.
Thank you, Mark. Next up, Elizabeth Venable. No stranger to the microphone. You always do, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I'm good to go, right?
You're
Okay.
good to go.
So basically, what I want to say is I understand that there are a wide variety of limitations that the state of Arizona, particularly the legislature, parts of the legislature, place upon the city of Phoenix. It's uncomfortable to raise these kinds of taxes, right? For people will get frustrated, but it's such a minimal increase, as far as I can tell, in terms of actual impact on the consumer. It's a very small percentage. So of course I'm in favor of this potential transaction privilege tax. Even though it's not my preferred form of tax, because it shifts the costs on the consumer as opposed to like an income tax that has levels, right? But, some things are not possible in Arizona, and we have to make smart choices in Phoenix to sustain our values, to have impact, to get the results we want, to address the causes of problems, or find solutions to problems, as opposed to, totally functionally operating on ideology often, And so I'm glad to see that you guys are, it doesn't surprise me, you guys are being creative in revenue generation. You have to do this. You have very few options. And I think it's critical. Of course, I would like to see the full allocation from the general fund, the $15.3 million that was stated in a meeting in the fall as being the allocation needed to sustain the investments that Phoenix has made for its unsheltered population. This is critical infrastructure, and it makes other costs not so onerous, right? Because it defrays costs from fire, from law enforcement, from emergency medical, maybe more state, but there's a variety of costs that the city bears when these services are not funded. And I'm just saying, yes, I agree with this transaction privilege tax. And I hope that the full allocation for the shelters will be possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next up, Jean-Paul, I can't read your last name. I don't want to butcher it. Okay, Rambadi.
for me, not much. Please let the money for the general fund. We need it for programs that help people such as homeless. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Next up, Tony Harris.
Good evening. I'm with the Fund for Empowerment. I would like to say I've talked to a few people, and just recently, a lot of them are struggling because they're on the streets, but they can't afford the outrageous rental increases that have been happening the last few years. And it's a shame that these landlords can rip people off like that. Like I know one guy that he was on the streets and then he was able to get off because they found him a job at Cass. But then each year his rent went up like $400 or $500. And he had to pick up a second job. Then a third one when it went up again. And he was like at $1,600 a month. And he's about to be homeless again because of that, because they're probably going to jack it up again this year. And there's several other people, like they get Social Security checks, and that's less than $1,000 a month. That's not enough to get into housing. And there's two people I'm trying to find housing for that are at the SOS on 15th Avenue in Jackson. And one of them, Social Security, just started, but when they went to apply at, for instance, one place called Silvercrest, right on 4th Ave in Fillmore, it's a 4-year waiting list. And it's old folks home over there. And then at 209 West Jackson, the waiting list is 2 years. So, I mean, I would be for a tax increase so it can be more homeless funding, for people that maybe get into hotels or something like that. If the city can take over some of these abandoned hotels to get a lot of these people off the street, because it's going to be pretty bad coming up this summer, with heat strokes and everything. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you. And our final speaker of the evening, unless we have additional cards coming in, would be another familiar face, Norris Norvold.
Good evening. My name is Norris Nordvold. I'm in Council District 6, 7530 North 10th Place. I'm here basically because last Tuesday, my wife and I, and today is Taco Tuesday, we went through Roberto's, which is 7th Street and north of Camelback on the west side of the road. And there you go through and we ordered the special. The special used to be $11.99, now it's going to $12.99. And so the regular price, the special went from $8 to $9.99. So I took out a 10 and I took out a 1. I don't use my credit card because if you use your credit card, they'll add 65 cents to your bill because if you're using a credit card there. Anyway, what happened, I had the 10 and a 1 and I got through and the tax was $11.18. I thought, oh my God, $11.18, that's a lot for me. I'm doing okay because I'm a City of Phoenix retiree, a long-time service. But if someone that is on fixed income and wants to go out and have a Taco Tuesday, with a half cent, that's going to go from $11.18 probably up to $11.73, and so that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. You look at buying a car or buying a new car. Don't use the used car. So anyway, I am opposed to that. But let me talk about two other issues. A bike pass. This afternoon, I did 14 miles on my bike. I live right by the canal. Going along the canal is great. Going to the underpasses is great. But then when I got a haircut today. Getting a haircut at 38th Street and Thomas. So I'm going down 24th Street. I'm trying to stay off the major streets because even when people are coming out of apartment houses or they're cutting through, you're really in danger on a bike. And so I, and coming downtown, I ride downtown a lot. I got a great coffee shop downtown. But coming downtown, it's wonderful because you've done a great job protecting the bike paths. I mean, a lot of those plastic things are broken. I can tell, but I love coming downtown because I feel much safer. And the other thing is hiking. This morning I also hiked. If I finish on the hiking, I'll do it. This morning I hiked about 2 miles at Piestewa, which I do every morning early. I was hiking last summer, and when you had the closure at 9 o'clock, you could hike. I could hike at 5:30. Don't close the hiking trails, please. Keep the hiking trails open. Don't close them for 5 months because, and these times, I need that for my mental stability to go out in the morning and hike and come back and you go to coffee or whatever. Keep the bike paths, and I support the police and the fire and everything. But I have one recommendation: if you could try to lower that 0.5 and try to add something to the restaurant tax. Restaurants are doing very well right now. We go to so many restaurants where you have that little thing, or you go to a shop and you're ordering cupcakes, whatever, and it's like $12, and so they said, do you want to make a tip? And I usually do a custom tip of $1. But everybody loves restaurants. The last election, they were trying to screw the restaurant employees. The voters voted 75% against the state trying to screw them. If you could raise that tax, people that are using the restaurants and those areas, but I'm sort of talking against it, but if you could find some other way than going to the full half cent, if you go to 0.3 or 0.4, it would be much better. But thanks for letting me talk tonight.
Thank you, Norris. 16 miles in one day, that's impressive. Okay, that concludes all of our public comments. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And just to reiterate what Amber said, our next steps in this process, on February 25th, we will present the multi-year forecast to the council, and then the council would take action on this proposed sales tax increase on March 18th. So thank you for coming out this evening, and safe travels home.